I went to the military and I learned counterintelligence as a trade. And oh my gosh, it was a lot of the same skills. One of the biggest things I learned was about how to build trust and use trust to accomplish your goals in business and everything else. You have to have a mastery of building trust in a wide variety of settings. And just learning how to do that translates to almost all disciplines.
Hey there. This is Pod Junction Podcast, the show where business leaders share how they use podcasting to grow, connect, and build their brands. I'm your host, Sadaf Bainan, and today I'm talking to Pete A. Turner. Pete is a former Army combat spy turned podcast host, media consultant, and master of the art of conversation. Pete gathered intel in conflict zones like Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and now he brings that same drive for uncovering ground truth to his podcast, The Break It Down Show. Pete, welcome.
Wow, that's great. Sometimes, even if you write your own bio, I don't run my bio out every day. I'm like, oh, well, I'm Pete H, or that kind of thing. And you hear it, you think, golly, what this guy did all these amazing things. And I'm not trying to hype myself, but it's amazing when you hear your bio, you're like, God, that is impressive. Like it's incredible. So I thank you for doing that. And you must get the same sense when you read all these bios. You're like, oh my God, look how incredible this person is.
Yes. And so excited to have you on the show because you are so incredible.
Thank you. Yeah.
Pete, I've really been looking forward to sitting down with you. And I really want to understand from your perspective what trust looks like behind the mic and how meaningful conversations can transform the way we show up in business and life. So let's start from the top. You've had such an intense and unique career. How did the Break It Down show come to life?
I have a degree in TV radio. I could not figure out how to get into TV or radio when I first started. And so that's what ultimately led me to the Army, because I just could not find a job. It's the very thing. And I just did a show talking to another guy who figured it out. He's younger than I am, but he figured out how to be a sports telecaster, right? And so I went to the military and I learned counterintelligence as a trade. And oh my gosh, it was a lot of the same skills and interviewing. And I've always wanted to have my own talk show ever since a kid, Johnny Carson, very common dream. Yeah. But and so I went and I became a counterintelligence agent, and I got better and better and better and better at it because I kept doing it. Now, there's a lot of ways to do counterintelligence. My particular brand was primarily combat zones and talking to people every day about what's going on in these crazy, harsh environments. And that, gosh, it taught me everything professionally. And one of the biggest things I learned, and I wanted to write a book about this, was about how to build trust and use trust to accomplish your goals in business and everything else. And then I get back and then, I meet this girl that I grew up with and we fell in love. And she's like, there's a book about that already. It's called The Code of Trust. And I was saying the words codify. I want to codify trust. And his book is called The Code of Trust. And his name is Robin Dreek, and he's wonderful. We're really good friends now. And I'm like, you wrote the book. And it was amazing because he had done the same kind of thing. And then I'm like, hey, everything you wrote is what I also discovered. And so we had this magical vibe between us. But for me, the root, like one of the elemental things of doing what we do here, what we do in the combat zones in terms of collecting is you have to have a mastery or develop as close as you can to mastery of building trust in a wide variety of settings at different speeds. And just learning how to do that, I think is I think that translates to almost all disciplines. Like if you work in a refinery, like I used to work at a bleach plant for a couple of weeks, and it was a dance. You had to learn how to do the dance because it's very dangerous work and big, heavy things moving around, and there's caustic chemicals everywhere. And if you aren't at the right step in the right time, you won't be trusted. And then therefore you can't do that part of the job. And so they have to build trust with you. You have to build trust with yourself. So trust, I think, is a universal element in business.
That's fantastic. So when did you then bring your show into, I guess, when did you start it?
Right. I guess that's part of the question I forgot to answer. Yeah. So I guess that next part is I came back and I wanted to tell stories, and I figured out how to get into media was by being on my friend's community radio station. I'm like, I'll start here and I'll figure it out from there. And then the radio station's community radio, so it's small. And they called us up after one night and they said, hey, you guys can't stay here anymore. You're too good. You're too big. Go do something bigger. This is community radio, folks. And so in a wonderful way, they kicked us out of the house. And so we came across podcasting as an answer to both of our itch to tell stories. Now, John is still my co-founder, and he's still on the show from time to time, but he's moved on to other ventures. And so now it's my show, the Break It Down Show. And over 10 years later, we've been doing this thing. And so that's where it came from, was this desire to tell the stories, to satisfy the itch I always had to have a talk show and talk to people. And, I look back now and I can't even believe I get to do all these amazing things. So that's where it came from, was this desire to tell stories. I'd had such an incredible career, like you mentioned. And I've always wanted to do this. Even as a kid, I would record myself with my friend, and we would have our own little morning radio show somewhere. There's cassette tapes in my mom's house with those things in them, because it was just a thing that sort of, you look in the rearview mirror and you're like, oh, it all connected. But going forward, none of it made any sense.
Thanks for sharing that. That makes a lot of sense. In your bio, I read or I said about this theme of ground truth. Yeah. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. I understand that it's a theme that you've carried from your military missions into your work behind the mic. And I'd just love for you to unpack that a bit for me.
Sure. Ground truth is a real interesting concept. What we want to believe to be true, what may be true, may not be true when you get to the ground level, right? So I'll use an example. In Baghdad, out in the outer land of it, there was a nuclear plant there called Tuwaitha. And many, many decades ago, the Israelis blew it up because it became a threat to them. So they blew it up. If you go to Tuwaitha in Iraq and you talk to the people around there, no, that was blown up by the Iranians. And so I'm like, no, that's not really what happened. And they're like, no, we're telling you right now, we were here. It was blown up by the Iranians. There is no convincing them otherwise, right? And so the ground truth there is the Iranians blew up this plant. It's their fault. And so they have a certain way they feel about it. If you can't accept that, then you're not accepting that reality. It doesn't matter if it's true. It doesn't matter if it's what history says. And so when you think about that, like, that's just one little thing. What else is true for them that wouldn't be true for me? Culture is part of this truth. And so, you start to look at these things in a bigger picture way. Like, my job is to convey the message from A to B and B to A, back and forth. And if I am uncomfortable with what B says because it's not the truth, then that's probably ground truth. And so to evolve that ground truth to a more pure truth, you would have to accept that, hey, this is where these guys are at. And if we're never in contact with that truth, like it never touches, then we can't accomplish our goal. And that's sort of what that concept is. And I hope that makes sense. But basically, it's what's reality on the ground. Like, if you go to a bunch of football fans, right, who support Liverpool, there's a whole bunch of ground truth there that doesn't match with what reality is outside of the stadium. They'll be fanatical. They'll think their team should win every game. And obviously that can't happen. That's sort of an element of ground truth. So the thing that you want to accomplish is going to be bound up by whatever ground truth is. And if you don't understand the ground truth, then you're going to struggle to reliably accomplish your goal.
Right. So what you're saying is, like, for example, in the example you gave of Iraq, unless you're able to understand what their ground truth is and almost in some sense meet them where they're at before you can, was it pure truth you said? So before they can understand or see pure truth? Or is it a case of, that is just the ground truth and we just leave it at that? Like, is the goal to move them to pure truth?
I think, so you don't want to lose track of your goal. Let's say that your goal is 3, right? And if by changing their ground truth, it takes you in a different direction, you're no longer focused on 3. Now you're trying to convince them of a reality that they're not interested in. I would rather accomplish my goal on your cultural path than on mine. And so if you say we've got to go left, right, up, down, left, right, up, down, to get to the path to where we accomplish this goal that I would like for us to accomplish, then that's the path I have to take. And that means understanding that, like, in some societies, an arranged marriage is very normal and actually lasts longer than when we do it ourselves. So I may not like that. I may feel like, hey, that's not right for the people involved. They're being forced to do something. But then when I sit down and I listen to them, everybody talk about it, well, that's their cultural truth. That's their reality. That's how they do it. And it seems to work. So maybe not in every case, but certainly doesn't work in the West version of it. So that's the ground truth, right? So if I'm trying to matchmake for a couple, or if I want to meet with a girl and have her become my wife, I've got to deal with that reality. And if those parents don't buy off on our less traditional form of marriage from their point of view, well, then I've got problems I've got to solve. And if I really love this girl, I've got to figure out how to do it. And so it's that kind of thing where you have a goal, and the goal has to be and you can change your goal, but your goal has to be the focus. Changing somebody's mind is, I don't think, a reliable way to accomplish these things. Meeting them where they're at, like you said, start there and figure out what's next, and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. This is how I would do it. But if you think there's a better way to accomplish this goal, like getting married, hey girl, how do we do it? And she would be like, oh, I'll just introduce you to my dad and it'll be fine. Right. And all of a sudden I no longer have to worry about this thing. She's got it. And then we take the next steps.
Cool. So how do you, Pete, how do you see podcasting as a continuation of your work in the field?
Yeah, I mean, podcasting is a chance for me to tell these stories, but also tell get other people to talk about their point of view, their stories. And I don't mind if someone disagrees with me. My job is to hear them out. So I'm not there to overly correct them. Now, we may have a challenging conversation and some kind of social thing that really is complicated. I mean, race is always a complicated thing. It brings in so much emotion. But if we can find a way to have a healthy conversation about that, we need more of those, not less. So I look for ways to take my show and turn it into something where someone's like, hey, I'd never heard that point of view before. Or, oh, you know what? I disagree with that person, but I see that they're actually a person and they've thought this through. So maybe I need to be a little less precious with what I get mad about. And so hopefully it takes and informs us in a way that makes us, I don't know, just a more informed person. I can't assume that I'm going to make anybody go invent something or anything, but just try to give them an interesting point of view, maybe from somebody they haven't heard of before, or maybe the most famous person in the world on that topic, and just get them to sit down and hear something they may not hear otherwise, because it maybe isn't necessarily the most popular thing ever. I'm just trying to find that thing that's like, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that before. I need to consider this more. Those are sort of the things I look for.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So do you see parallels then in how you build trust with your guests?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. There was a time after I was a combat guy that I came back and I couldn't get a job anywhere. I didn't know any executives. I didn't have that kind of a professional network, and I didn't want to do spying anymore. I didn't want to go to war anymore. And I failed at figuring out how to build that network. It was because I needed to eat. And so I became a handyman. And all the same skills applied. Sure, I'll fix the problem. Or one of my friends will be getting a divorce, like, hey, Pete, you got any work for me? Like, yeah, you want to run around with me all day? You fix the couch. I'll work on talking to the wife or the office manager, whoever it is. And so I would work on my trust building skills. And one of the things, like when people are moving, they get so freaked out. Like nobody likes to move, right? And so they would get a hold of me and I would say, yes, I can come help you. They would describe what they were going to do. And I'm like, stop talking about it. Just get everything packed up into boxes. And I want you, once we show up, I want you to worry about something else, because I'm going to get you moved. So don't worry 1 second about this anymore. And then you'd hear, like, especially like with the spouse who's trying to manage a family. She's like, really? I can just let you do this? I'm just going to do it. And I'm like, I'm just going to do it. And if I have a problem, sometimes problems happen. I'll come to you and be like, hey, I got this problem and I can't solve it myself, or I want you to know about it. And they're like, oh my God, that's so great. Because I would just take yeah, exactly. Right. And so when someone's like nervous about coming on, because not everybody is as comfortable as we are doing these things, I'll say, look, I've done 2,000 of these things. You're in good hands. My job is to make you shine. You're going to be safe there. All you got to do is trust me. And like everybody else has, you're going to go through a conversation with me. And about an hour later, you're going to look around and go, that was so easy. That was so fast. That's what's going to happen. I know it because I've done it so many times. Just relax about this and move, or don't, but just know that you're in good hands. And they usually go, all right, you're right. I'll do it. And that's that trust building. I say that because I've done it enough times to know the words like, there's some fear here. So I just try to assuage that fear as best I can and just say, put this on me. This is very familiar ground for me. What you're worried about. And I'll say this too. I'll say, Sadaf, hey, listen, you're worried about stuff. That's my job. I will run the show. All you've got, everything you need to know about podcasting to talk on my show. So don't worry about that. You're totally prepared. You're in great hands. Don't worry about things that belong to me. And then they're like, you're right. I'm just making it. And they realize they're making it into this big dragon. And I'm like, stop.
Yeah.
It's not even a dragon there. I'm the dragon. Look at me. I'm a nice guy. I'm going to take care of you. That's what I do. But that's all from my spy stuff. I learned all of that from theirs. How do you calm a person down? You try to remove, and this is in combat zones. And so you try to remove the unnecessary fears. A lot of problems are primarily problem and then specter. And the specter is so big, it's off the screen. And so poke a hole through the specter and say, that's mostly a specter. Yes, there's a problem. Yes, there's danger here. But day to day, day in, day out, how dangerous is it? Let's just get this one little thing done. And that's sort of what I do with the show.
That's awesome. And I can imagine that that would really put people at ease. And I think it would probably to the point where they can you forget the camera's even there and you're just having, a chat.
Yeah.
I'm wondering though, if there's been situations like that where the conversation has gone into an unexpected direction and been come as a surprise to you. Do you have any
Yeah,
examples
I
of
mean,
that?
sometimes you get emotional, and my job is to kind of
Mm,
control that, but also give the audience the excitement that they need. And so
mm,
sometimes I'm like, gosh, I got too excited. I did too much talking or whatever it was. And so that
yeah.
excitement tends to take us in weird spots. One thing I will do
Mm,
is like, if I'm talking to
mm,
you and I'll say, I'm going to ask you a tough question, but I'm sure you
mm,
can take it. And if you don't want to answer it, don't. I used to say this all the time. If someone would say to me, are you a spy? Like when I was deployed in a combat environment, and I would say, yes. And if I ask you a question you don't like, don't answer it. So I just kept that
yeah.
tool, right? And so I asked a guy today to be critical of modern reporters because they tend to inject their opinion when it should just be the news.
Mm,
And he's like, yeah, I don't mind answering that. But I've told him like, hey, this is a little risky. I acknowledge that for you. And if you don't want to talk about this, we'll talk about something else. Now, almost always they go, oh, I can handle that. Don't worry about that. What's the
mm,
question? I'm like, oh, well, how come reporters write all this nonsense in their stories? And they're like, oh my God, I've been talking about this forever. And so it creates a smooth, for me, it creates a smooth path that
mm,
allows people to go into this slightly risky area. And then if it gets dicey, I can always, and again, it's my job. I just back them out. Like, hey, thanks for talking about that. That was hard. Let's talk about something happy. And then everybody's like, please, let's do that. And so
yeah, yeah.
it's just a little bit of a dance. And there's design in that
Mm,
dance. You and the audience aren't supposed to know that I'm doing this dance. But and
mm,
then the guests should feel it, but not necessarily know it. But I have taken the conversation here, there, and then
mm.
brought it back to where and we land on the happy or no, and that's what I'm supposed to do as the
Yeah.
host.
That's very cool. Thanks for sharing that. The other thing I'm quite curious about is you have a format where you rotate co-hosts,
Oh yeah,
which is
yeah.
quite unusual to me. I hadn't come across that before. So why did you choose that format and how does it shape the kinds of conversations that you're able to have?
You know, I do a lot of one-to-one shows, and sometimes it's
Okay.
because I just want all of that guests for me, and so I don't always do it, and I'm like, oh my God, I
Okay.
want it, but I know so many people, right? And so there's a couple things, and I like to amplify things. So I'm going to have a show
Okay.
no matter what. You and I are going to talk no matter what, right? But I'm like, but
Mhm.
you know who would be great is if I brought Bob Greenlee in here. Bob Greenlee's like the icon of all yes, Joe Rogan, but Bob Greenlee's been in the business of podcasting for decades now, right? And he would say, yes, I know if I asked him, he'd sit in with us and we'll have a conversation. Now I've brought in this worldwide expert to talk to you about the thing that you're an expert about. And even if you guys are a little bit cross, you'll be collegial because and if you're not, that's my job. Hey, let's find areas where we can discuss where it's challenging, but we don't get too crazy. And so that's the magic of having the co-host. So I can bring somebody in who wasn't even part of the conversation originally and blow their minds. And I'll give you an example. So I had an author on, and he wrote about a very famous, like one of the most famous baseball voices. This guy was a broadcaster
Mm,
for 70 years. And so he wrote this wonderful book about this guy named Vin Scully. And so I didn't tell him, but I know Vin Scully's nephew, and he's been on the show before. And so I brought my buddy Dan on the show to talk to this author. And I'm like, hey, did you get a chance to talk to Dan? And McLaughlin is his name. And he's like, no, I didn't talk really much of the
mm,
family at all. And I'm like, guess what? I'm going to have Dan on the show with us. And he's like, you kidding me? That's amazing. And so now you have someone who lived and knew, the
mm,
guy, Vin Scully, as a family member, right? But also as a notable voice in his own right, writes his own, he writes politics, but he also writes about baseball. And so he's a very notable guy in his own right. And now you have the author who's writing about his uncle. And you just create this amazing three-way dynamic where a lot of times I just sit back and I just let them talk because there's magic in their ability to have a conversation that only the two of them can have. And I love those shows the most. I'll give you one more example real fast. There's a very famous author named Sebastian Junger. He writes a lot about combat people. He also wrote the book Perfect Storm, which they turned into a movie. So a very, very, very successful author. And he had a near-death experience and wrote about it in his most
mm.
recent book. Well, another friend of mine had a near-death experience. He was dead for 15 minutes. He was shot and nicked his femoral artery, and so he died. And they brought him back 15 minutes later. And so I brought him in because nobody knows more about dying than this guy does. my buddy Josh. And
Mm.
Josh at the PhD level is studying what dying is. And it's amazing. Turns out that Sebastian has carried this survivor guilt because one of his reporter friends died in the exact same way that Josh died, except for he didn't come back. And so Sebastian looks at Josh and says, "Can I ask you about your death? Because that's how my friend Tim died." And they had this conversation that I never could have created on my own, and it wouldn't have happened if I didn't put them in the room together. And Josh was able to look at Sebastian and say, when he died, it was perfect bliss. Everything about it was perfect. He didn't feel alone. He wasn't worried about family. He just felt bliss. And Sebastian had this weight, at least temporarily, taken off his back and was like, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I've carried this around for so long." And I don't know if that rock is still off his back. Sometimes that rock jumps back on your back. But in that moment, I was like, damn, that's why I do this. This is that these two dudes can have this moment. Whether the audience gets it or not, that's up to them. But I watched those guys relate in a way that was very, very, very special.
That's incredible.
Thank you. I agree.
Yeah,
I love it.
That's very cool. And I think that would be really fun to watch. And I think as a guest and, the co-host that you would have brought on for that particular conversation, that would have been, that must be really rewarding for them as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And Josh doesn't do much media, so I can kind of dig him out of his hole only sometimes. Yeah. And so, yeah, it was really exciting. It was really, really exciting. I loved it. And I love anytime it doesn't always go that well, but it always goes well. Right. And so it's a neat thing to be able to, why don't you two know each other? Let's have a conversation. And that's just, I can't get enough of that. I love it.
That's amazing. I love that. Pete, with your background in intelligence and I'm thinking that your listening skills, I mean, you've already touched on it now. And as you were talking, I've been thinking that your listening skills are like a whole other level because you're listening for stuff that most people normally wouldn't. And so I'm wondering how your background has shaped the way you approach the preparation for your interviews.
Yeah, this will sound crazy. I don't prep really at all. I might read a book, right? I might read enough of the book so that I'm comfortable, but I don't need to do that. And part of this is because I've done so much interviewing in my career, so much listening in the active moment. So if I was being a spy and I went out on a patrol, I wouldn't know who I was going to meet. I would just meet that person. Maybe I have an interview set up, but I bet that person cold. And so since I'm meeting someone cold over and over again and getting comfortable talking to them, I'm very comfortable being completely unaware of who that person is. And by the way, I never ask bio questions because for me, I'm like, someone else is going to do that. I want this person to talk about something wholly new. And then what I do is I listen and they give me that surface level thing that they're always going to say. And I'm going to find the point where I'm going to say, stop right there. Let's dig in right there and go deep. And then once I find that thing, that's incredible. And sometimes it's not an obvious thing, but I've got not a knack, but I've developed a knack for saying, hey, that right there is interesting. So I'll give you an example. A very, very famous sports photographer who's done books with people like Kobe Bryant, and he takes all of the big pictures here in America for all of the big events, NBA especially. And he's like, I was this Jewish kid out east. I was going to school, and then I came out to LA, and then I just sort of stayed. And I'm like, how did you go from the East Coast to the West Coast and just stay? And he's like, right. My sister's Didi Khan. She played Frenchie in Greece, and I slept on her couch for a summer. And I'm like, big change in this whole story, right? It's not about Didi, his sister, but the fact is if I wouldn't have thought to ask that, like, what brought you out here? We never would have got to the reason why he got to LA and how improbable it is to have that kind of a landing pad. We have this very famous sister who's got a lot of work, a lot of money at that time, especially. And now, like, you're her little brother, and like, well, I can do anything because I've got this so like that little piece unlocked a whole part of his story for me in the show that was off of his normal like talking points, and it became a richer show because of it.
Yeah. So do you, because you're saying, you look for something that you can hook into and ask deeper questions. Is that with the aim to move towards a certain goal, or is that just because you're curious about something that's been said and you just want to dig to see where it goes, or is it a mix?
It's a mix, and for sure there's a certain goal because of the work I've done and how much I've done of it. I don't have to hold on to a goal. I just sort of ride the horse, and I let go of the reins, and I let the horse go where it needs to go to. I know that the horse will go somewhere wonderful. because I've done this too many times. And if it doesn't, I just nudge. I don't ever try to control the conversation very much. I kind of know where I'm going to start quite often. I immediately don't do that. And I just kind of rely on, I don't want to say my gut because it's developed, but I've got a developed sense for what I need to say next. And I just let that happen. And so my interview style is very loose, but also I will get the person at the other end to be like, one of the best interviews I've ever done. I never get to talk about these other things. You got me to say things that I never talk about. And not that I'm trying to trick them, but I just get them to the spot. And so the goal is to get them there. I don't know how we're going to get there, but I know wherever there is, we'll get there because I know how to build the trust and let them have the conversation, and then just find those spots where I'm like, and hook here, pull there, push, leave it alone. And then once they get going, I don't know where we're going, but I love that we're going this fast and they're that passionate. And so that's when I kind of sit back in the rocking chair and let them really shine because they're doing these amazing things.
I know you've done a lot. I think it's, hundreds of episodes. How do you stop yourself from feeling burnt out?
I don't know how I do it. I do get a little burned out. And usually what I do is I back off the throttle. I do at least 5 shows in most weeks, sometimes more. And I don't get burned out from doing too much. I just kind of like have to do something else for a while. And so I'll back off the pace. I won't book as many guests. By the way, my show is so established, it books itself a lot of the time.
Amazing.
Yeah. So someone will call, hey, I wrote a book again. Hey, I wrote a paper again. Hey, I'd love to come on and talk about this movie. So they'll get a hold of me and I'm just like, yeah, okay, great. Let's do it. And so I don't have to book as much. Booking is a challenge. It requires a lot of work. And so I do look for certain people, but I'm hunting now and I'm looking for a very specific target. And then if I don't get them, no big deal, because I'm going to get them at some point if I want them. And I just let the show sort of dictate that. So as I've gotten less precious about who and when and why and all that, I don't have to care as much. And so that kind of refills my candle a little bit. So I'm spending less of my heart and soul on the knit and the grit. Like, I'll give you an example. I don't publish really on podcast channels anymore because although there's a lot of listeners potential, it's just extra soul burning work. And I don't want to do it. If you want to listen to me, I'm easy to find. I'm on YouTube. I'm on X. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. Like it's not hard to find me. I'm just not going to publish to a platform that it just takes. It's not that it's extra work. It's just why do that? If I get an extra 5,000 views or listens a month because it's on Apple Podcasts, it doesn't benefit my business. It just takes away from my money or my time and my passion. And so I have kind of whittled some of those things away. And this costs something. It's not free, but I just don't spend time on that. And one of the things is my battery recharges faster.
You also help people launch their own podcasts.
Yes.
And so is that the business you're talking about, or is there something more to that? Yeah,
there's something more to that. I mean, I don't want too many podcast clients. Not that I don't want, to have business, but I just don't want to spend my whole life working on somebody else's show. It takes a lot of work, and I'm very passionate about it. And so I'm the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, do you really need to do a podcast? I'm going to be shaking my head now. Do you really need to do a podcast? Are you willing to spend time? How much time do you think you have extra a month? Do you have 10 hours a month? Oh, not 10 hours. Okay, well, then you shouldn't do this. Like, go find 10 hours or buy 10 hours. Like, do you want to just show up, sit down, have a great time and talking to the microphone? Great. Well, then you're talking about paying somebody 40 hours worth of work to do 4 shows a week. And if you're not going to do 4 shows in a month, 4 shows in a month. If you're not going to do 4 shows in a month, then you shouldn't do this. Why are you doing this? Is this for your business? Okay, great. What do you hope to gain from it? Well, I'd like to drive revenue. No. You have to do this because of some other reason. Revenue will come as a byproduct of your success. You can't, most people cannot reliably. So I'm talking them out of doing this because I know how hard it is and how expensive it is, right? And so that's sort of my initial thing. If they survive that and they still want to do it, and I'm like, given all of that, I'll tell you this right now, and this sounds arrogant, but this is just how this is. If we work together, I will not be the problem because I know how to produce. You can look at my record, right? So this is all going to be you. If you are desperate to do this, if you want to spend the money to do this, and I don't need to make $1 million, then I'll do this with you. And then it's worth my time and it's worth your time to work on this thing together. That's sort of how I approach the podcast advice thing. But I'd rather kill off your dream early and have you say, you know what, I'm going to do something else. Because the honest truth is maybe what you really need to do is spend budget on PR and just focus on PR. Or maybe you really just need to spend money on marketing or something else, as opposed to this thing that's very hard to reliably get from A to money. If your goal is money, absolutely go for that and do it. But I'm not the guy to help you do that, because I'll help you tell the story, but I'm going to want you to do it in a different way. And because I know how this business is, and it's very particular and it's very challenging. And it's like starting an unreliable business that isn't likely to net you a worthwhile profit for 2, 3, 5, 10 years, right? I mean, if that's what someone wants to get. So that's kind of how I approach that whole thing. But I also produce movies, and that's a different business altogether. So those are the two things I do professionally most of the time.
Excellent. Just about your podcasting clients or people who come and talk to you about possibly starting one, what are some of the most common misconceptions do people have when they start podcasting?
Yeah, that it's easy. Like we all, like, it's like when you see a VW bus, man, I'd like to go drive that thing around and go camping and stuff, whatever it is. There's things that create dreams, and podcast is a dreamy thing. And so I try to tell them, this is a job. If you have time for a second job, then okay, we should talk more. If you don't have time, if your plate is full, can you clear your plate off? Can you spend some money to buy some capacity? Whether it's getting somebody else to do your marketing or whatever it is, and then use that time. Like, I've had CEOs are like, I'd like to get my final thoughts after every show. And I'm like, great, we'll do that. Do you have time to do that? Because it's going to be a thing you have to do all the time. You're the most busy person. Do you need to do this, or should your marketing person do it? Or should your other, and they struggle with that because they need to be the face of everything, but they don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to do it. And that's where a lot of businesses struggle with, how do I make this worthwhile? And who am I communicating with, and to what end? There's a lot of different choices you can make. It's very a la carte. And so the misconception is that it's easy. And I'm like, it's anything but easy. And it's often not the best tool. So, and I don't mind saying, the thing I love is not the best tool for you. Go work on PR. That's what you're telling me.
Pete, just thinking or looking at the future, what excites you about where podcasting as a platform is heading for business growth?
The one thing that I really love about podcasting is it's so comfortable now that people know about it. If I was running a sales team, I'd get over to see the marketing person and be like, let's get a podcast. And here's what I would love to see people do. And I hope that it goes this way. So that sales director gets with the marketing director and like, let's build a podcast. And it's not to become famous. It's not to do anything else. It's just to get my salespeople in front of their dream clients. And so whatever your product is, bring that person on, and don't talk about that part of the business. Just say, hey, I love what you do in the business. You're fascinating. Sure, I'd love you to be a client, but more importantly, I'd love to come in and talk on our podcast about what it is that you do. And I think so we're always trying to build a funnel and have a bunch of leads in it. Just go directly to your leads and use your podcast. I would love to see companies take that action and just goes. And now I can understand why you'd want to have a podcast, right? Because you're not trying to get 1 million likes. You're just really trying to one-to-one communicate with these clients, and then bring them back and be like, hey, you've been a client for 5 years. I love it. Let's talk about how well you're doing, and just give them a chance to do something that they don't normally get to do. There's so many ways to take a podcast with the business and make it amplify yours and your partner's business. Even your adversary, you can bring them on, because a podcast isn't adversarial at its core. And so you can both talk about the things, the way you're innovating, the way that I think that communication ability for businesses is where I think businesses are headed, because they get it, but it's very hard to justify the expense, because it's like, wait, what do you mean? Like, we're going to drive sales? Like, yeah, eventually you're really going to become well connected with this person, because podcasts are world-class networking machines. And if you can turn that, if the person's clever enough to turn the networking into leads, which is absolutely possible, then I see more and more businesses doing that.
I totally agree. I think the hundreds, millions of downloads is a nice thing to have, but success is when you are able to actually reach your clients and network with them directly.
Yeah. I mean, how great would it be if you didn't have to cold call, other than to say, hey, would you come on my podcast? Which is an easy yes for a lot of people, right? Wow. Now you're in the door talking to them. And here's the thing that's crazy. Everybody listen, here's the secret part. So you go in and you're going to go to a software company. And so you get a hold of, like, yeah, we'd love to have you. Great. I'm glad to come to you. Wait, you'll come to us? Yeah, we'll come to you. Oh, okay. What do you need? I don't know, Wi-Fi, electricity. That's it. And then you come and now you're their guest. So now they're hosting you while you put them on the show. And let me tell you something, the dynamic changes, Yeah. And of course you're going to exchange business cards. Of course you're going to exchange, You're going to have this wonderful moment. People, please work on this with your sale. I'm glad to help or not, whatever. But that's what your salespeople should be doing, is just setting up. It's marketing and networking all smashed into this wonderful thing and using a podcast to amplify it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Pete, you've shown us that trust isn't just built by accident, it's earned. And if you could leave leaders on this podcast with one insight about showing up more powerfully through a conversation, what would that be?
When you're in a position of power, you've gotten there because I say everything in life is a competition. So you've done well, right? However you've graduated up the scale at your business, you've done it. And it's easy to think that you're the right person to talk at all times. And a lot of times, the less you talk, the more everybody else will talk. And if you get that to happen, you can draw in things. Like, one of the things I used to say to commanders is, wherever you go, you're the commander. You're the most powerful man in this region. So they'd always say, well, I need to know who the most powerful man in the region is. I'm like, oh, I already know. It's you. And if you stop being the most powerful person, somebody else is going to rise up and they're going to show you that, hey, I have knowledge here. I have the capability. And so it's very easy. And I see this a lot with I don't want to call it micromanagement, but it's just allow someone else to be great. Allow them to be great and get out of their way so they can be great. And one of the biggest lessons I learned from combat was this. We had an Afghan governor, and I built a lot of trust with him. And I knew that I had trust because I tested, test. You don't just assume trust. And he said to me, Pete, here's the thing. There's only room for one sword in the scabbard. Because I was telling him he was the boss. And I'm like, all right. And he's like, so who's the sword here? And I'm like, ooh. Well, who do you think is the sword? He's like, well, so the commander tells me that he's not the sword. He's the sword. And I'm like, oh man, that's great. So you're saying that you're willing to be the sword if we get out of the scabbard? And he's like, absolutely. If you allow me to, I will lead and I will show you what I can do. Well, all right, let's go. Wow. Because that's the goal. And again, I had to use his path to get down that way. Right. And then I go to my boss and I'm like, he's like, there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. And he wants to know if he's the sword or you're the sword. And then the boss is like, let me get out of the way, because that's what we're desperate. And it's okay for that person to make mistakes because they're the sword and there's a lot of pressure. But now you're working like, how do we get behind your effort? How do we understand where you're going so we can help amplify what you're doing? And I think any business leader can learn that lesson. Is like, yeah, I'm always going to be the sword. I'm the boss around here. But if I shut up and get out of the way and let someone else rise up and let them show me what they've got, well, then now I'm developing people at a higher level. And that to me pays the bills in a lot of cases.
I love that. There's a lot of wisdom in that, isn't it?
Yeah.
To let someone else do the talking and forge the way and step in as and when you need to, rather than being the one who's always pushing ahead.
Yeah. And there's a lot of ways to accomplish the job. And so, but just like one of the things I figured out, this is another thing, just combat wisdom, right? I would go to some elder and I would say, what's the smallest thing that we could just do today? You, me, and the government, the Afghan government, Iraqi government. What's the smallest thing? Like, let's get more electricity. Like, that's big. Let's go small, like small. And they would say, you know what would be great? If you could accomplish X. I'm like, well, you want to meet me at the governor's house tomorrow? And we'll talk to him about it. It's like, oh, you're kidding me. And I'm like, look, I can make a meeting happen. And so we would make these tiny things. And it would be simple requests like, can we get a crosswalk painted? Because our kids are going to school and it's dangerous. Just having someone slow down traffic or move this concrete barrier so that we can, whatever it was super small stuff. And everybody would look around and be like, that's it. That's all we got to do today. And we win. And so those kind of wins are available in all businesses, all efforts. What's the smallest thing that we can accomplish today that would make it easier for you, sales staff, or you, accounts payable, or whoever it is? What's the smallest thing we can do to help improve your condition? And all of a sudden, that's all ground truth too, right? Like, what's their real problem? Their real problem is that the road is ruddy. Well, we have a machine that can fix that in 10 minutes. Well, then what are we waiting for? Let's go fix that thing. And that's I think is business. Like, that's strong in business, is just to improve the condition of somebody and do that reliably and repeatedly. And you're going to stack so many small wins. The big wins will be automatic.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Sometimes less really is more.
Yeah, for sure.
Pete, this has been such an insightful conversation for me. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. It's always great I know how much work it goes into making these things. And so I'm always grateful to be on someone else's air. It means a lot to me. Thank you for letting me talk all this time. I try to make it impactful, and hopefully everybody enjoyed it. Good.
I have no doubt. Pete, if someone wants to connect with you or learn more about your podcast, your consulting work, where should they go to do that?
Pete@breakitdownshow.com, or just Pete A. Turner on X. I'm on Facebook. I'm not that hard to find. Type in Pete A. Turner, it'll come up. I don't try to hide from anybody. I'm who I am, and people can get a hold of me. That's how it is. And I'd love to, as much as I'm talking about don't do a podcast, if you want to do one, of course I'll help you do it, but I try to put you through the test. So if you want to do one, let me know. I'm glad to at least listen to you. And I'm glad to not take any of your money until we get to that point where I'm like, now we're in the money zone. So that's it. Pete@breakitdownshow.com. Give me a ring, and I'm glad to chat.
Perfect. To those listening, thank you for being here. All the links that Pete has just mentioned can be found in the show description. And if you're podcast curious and wondering whether this could be the right tool to grow your brand or business, I hope Pete's story has shown you that conversations, when built on trust, have the power to change everything. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.